PM. Here, here.
Cornell, Izzy. Ryan and I believe that it is incredibly problematic to whitewash a culture, to say something is not truly belonging to that culture anymore. We truly believe that actors and actresses in Bollywood should not endorse any sort of whiteification beauty product of any sort, right? So this is body lotions, this is any sort of like medical procedure that could whiten your skin. But by what do we mean by not endorse, right? Just to clarify this. We mean this by not using. We think as a public figure, anything you wear, anything you associate with yourself, you're endorsing it. It's why women like wearing Christian Louboutins, because when they see the red sole of their shoe, they're endorsing it. They're creating a market for that individual. And so we believe they cannot use it and cannot be in commercials for it. I think that's pretty clear. I'd be willing to take a clarification after the minute is up if something needs to be more clear than that. But I think it's pretty obvious. Okay. So I have, not out of 10 again. So I have really three main points today. I have, what are beauty standards? Why are they problematic? What are the harms of endorsing a product like this? But also, where do we get efficacy on our side when it comes to changing beauty standards, when it comes to saying that this is something that is not appropriate for a culture to do? But do you have a clarification?
Yeah, I did. Does that mean that because if you wear something, when you wear something, you're technically endorsing it, Bollywood actors who have already used skin lightening products and who already have whiter skin would have to no longer participate in the Bollywood industry?
Yes, you're done. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so well, if they've already used it, we'd say to stop using it, and I think that's enough, right? We don't want to fire a ton of actors and actresses, but we say you're not allowed to use this anymore. You're not allowed to endorse this product. So yeah, I think that's very clear. Okay. So, what are beauty standards? So we see that not even just in Western liberal democracies, but all around the world, beauty standards are put on a pedestal of whiteness, right? We don't just see this because we have great powers and imperialistic powers that we're white. We see this in things like having pale skin means you're not outside working hard hours, and this puts you in a socioeconomic class that means you're not really viable to be a politically, civically engaged citizen. It means that you're just not white enough to be part of our culture. Right? And these are really incredibly harmful, and they're incredibly elitist, and especially when we see it in something like Bollywood, which is supposed to be a truly culturally Indian, performance and a truly cultural Indian media source, to see them now whitewashing that culture, to say it's not really Indian, it's only really white, right? If you're really Indian, if you have brown skin, then you just can't be in Bollywood. And we think that's really problematic when this is integral to their culture, when they do look towards these actors as role models, when these are something that's a very big part of culture in India, right? So we think that's incredibly problematic. So what are the harms really of endorsing this? Is like any endorsement from a political figure or from a celebrity, is it adds weight to it, and it gives that endorsement value, right? So when you have a famous actress saying, I like my skin to be white, you go, especially as a young teenager, maybe not us all who think rationally as adults, right? But as someone who's growing up watching this, they say, I want to look like that celebrity. I want to be her. And when they go, oh, she's Indian too, but she seems whiter, how do I do that? And we then have these people endorsing whiteness products. I think it's incredibly harmful for the perceptions of those individuals watching that to say, you can't be in Bollywood unless you're white. You can't be successful unless you're white. We think that's just incredibly pernicious, right? Because we also see that this is a coerced choice, even on behalf of the actors and actresses who use these whitewashing creams in their products, right? And the Bollywood actors do this because of these beauty standards of whiteness, because it is shown in cultures that the whiter you are, the better job you have, the whiter you are, the better neighborhood you live in, is that whiteness is a coerced choice. They feel like they're obligated to do this and to get an international scheme, right? All of a sudden Bollywood has been pretty popular in Western liberal democracies the past 5 years. It's been building a lot of steam. And a lot of this is because all of a sudden the people in Bollywood look a whole lot relatable to us, right? Isn't that a little problematic that we're they begin whitewashing to become more appealing to cultures who aren't their own, who Bollywood is targeted for, who Bollywood was created for, right? We think this is this is harmful to a lot of individuals, but we also think it's really harmful to these actors to feel like they need to fill these beauty standards in order to be successful, because it just translates into everyone needs to fill these beauty standards to be successful. So where do we get efficacy on our side, right? So what happens when these individuals stop endorsing these beauty products and decide that they're going to continue living on, right? And I think Op is going to get up here and be like, but you're still allowing people who had them to use them. But at that point, I mean, as long as they don't continue to use them and they're not speaking openly about using them and saying, listen, that's not something we're allowed to do anymore, I think that's fine on our side, right? Because they're saying we're going to start embracing this culture. But the efficacy in it is that these people are role models, right? People look up to them. I've explained this to you. And they're in a position of power. They dictate a lot of the cultural interactions. They dictate a lot of the different social media things that happen. And we think that when we're able to get them to stay on a stance that says, listen, we do believe that you have the right to empower your own identity, right? You don't have to change the color of your skin in order to become a Bollywood actress and to become an actress in general. You don't need to do this. I mean, like, this even happens in our own culture, where, like, my friends and I, we were binging on, like, early 2000s music videos, right? And we were listening to Beautiful Liar by Shakira and Beyonce. They both look incredibly white in that video. If you've, like, ever seen that video, you can't tell them apart because of how bleached out they are. I'm telling you that these are both women who are people of color, right? And that's incredibly problematic when you see those harms, because you think that is the standard. What is sexy and Beautiful Liar is two white women dancing up on each other. When in reality, like, why can't these women of color own their own sexuality, right? Why is sexuality regarding women so problematic when it's like a woman of color? I think this is incredibly pernicious, and I think it says that the only people who have a voice and can advocate for their sexuality in these things are white women. And I think that's just not how our standards should be. Also, if anyone has a POI, I'd love to take it in the last 15 seconds. Okay.
How are you responding to the fact that you're not doing anything to change beauty standards? You're, like, the existence of beauty standards, you're just changing what the standards are.
I think we do change the existence of beauty standards, because first of all, I don't think the same Bollywood actor is going to be acting for like 100 years, right? I think, like, as this program continues, we're going to see more women who are, like, of natural, like, Indian skin tone, like, become Bollywood actresses and actors, right? So I think that this is, like, not necessarily fun, but we change that because we're putting in a metric into an institution that is very prominent, saying, listen, you are, like, we believe that you should not be able to do this, right? Like, this isn't a policy motion. We're believing on the principles of why this is a good idea, right? And the reason we do think this is a good idea is because once people stop using them and people show that their natural skin is just as beautiful, their natural skin is just as empowering, I think that sends a stronger message, right? We're talking about celebrities here. We're not really talking about politicians. Okay. And so, yeah, I think that, yeah, so, like, basically, I guess that answered my question. Like, how do we change perceptions and standards of beauty in the society? Is the fact that we're not all of a sudden saying that you have to be one shade in order to be part of this community. We're no longer saying that the color of your skin dictates your success. And because even if it's not true that your color of your skin dictates your success, which arguably statistically it really does, I think it's fair enough to say that people should be able to watch TV and feel comfortable and be able to share something with these individuals in a culture that was made for them, in a culture that was bred in a country that white wasn't the norm, and we are proud to live those.
Time to speak before this speech, and now invite you to opposition.
Society government got up here and they told you, how do we change perceptions of beauty standards? We don't really think that, like, we think it's problematic that the beauty standards are favor like whiteness. But we think the real problem is the existence of beauty standards at all. So when side government gets up here and says, like, these beauty standards shouldn't be based on this, implicitly what they're saying is there should be beauty standards, just not these ones. We think that that's problematic, and this doesn't address the underlying issues. And by having celebrities reaffirm the existence of beauty standards by making statements like this in their way, we're still perpetuating this problem. So on a couple of points of rebuttal, just a quick attack on their efficacy idea. Like, maybe we have fiat, but like, how are they enforcing it? She briefly said, like, not allowed, but like, are we banning this? If so, that means that the government is essentially opposing what you can and how you can and can't express yourself. If not, like, if all these celebrities aren't on board, then some of them are inherently still going to bleach their skin because it gives them an advantage. But let's say that you have fiat and that everyone's on board. I'll give you that. All right, so let's say that to not endorse means to not use. Like, there's a couple of problems with that. Firstly, their skin is already bleached, like my partner pointed out, which means it's still light, especially considering the elaborate measures that people in these positions take to keep their skin very light. But secondly, we think this actually hasn't undermined the beauty standards. What this does is that, like, the selection factor is essentially going to change to naturally lighter skin, because there is variation within populations, and before we had skin bleaching products, that was how these beauty standards were imposed. So in this way, the only change you're really making is like prohibiting people who have like naturally or who don't have naturally lighter skin in these cultures from participating, because what you haven't actually changed is the beauty standards, which means that these people with lighter skin are still going to get better jobs and live better neighborhoods, and we're still going to have this problem. Okay, so on to my no, thank you. So on to my why don't they solve? We think, as I said before, this just changes what they are. It doesn't change the fact that there are standards, which is the problem. we think that celebrities should not be endorsing anything. We think that people should not see them as an authority for what is or is not beautiful. And in this way, by continuing this cycle, by continuing to participate, you are implicitly reaffirming that, and frankly, explicitly. Why do we think beauty standards are what's problematic? We think inherently, in the definition of a beauty standard, or a standard at all, it has to exclude something. There has to be some kind of comparative. It has to be like, well, this is different and better. Right? So inherently, there's always going to be some people who are included within the standard and some people are going to be excluded. It's how the social construct works. Okay, so then we think that essentially, beauty standards, no matter what they are problematic because we think people who are unconventional appearances or self-expressions are going to have lower self-esteem and are going to be inhibited from having success and progressing in society based on arbitrary reasons, like what they personally prefer or how they prefer to express themselves. We think also people waste time and money distracted by unrealistic standards that they will never achieve and hate themselves for it. We think that this is problematic and that people should essentially spend their time internally defining what they think beautiful is, what that means to them. We think that this, instead of having a beauty standard and pretending that beauty is something that is objective, we should acknowledge that it's subjective and eliminate these authorities and essentially let people define it for themselves. Yeah, okay.
We agree that beauty is subjective. I pretty much have a different taste from most people in this room. But at the point at which celebrities are only one standard of beauty, we think that's incredibly problematic because then you're stuck in a vacuum on your side where the only standard of beauty to look up to is whiteness.
I think that it's still comparatively relatively worse to just continue to reaffirm what beauty standards are. I think as long as beauty standards exist, it will oppress some people. It's the only thing they're changing is who's getting excluded from this paradigm. We think that that's inherently problematic, and the solution is not to essentially let celebrities continue to be authority figures or pretend that they're good actors. Furthermore, we think that essentially having beauty standards inhibits a person's self-development because they'll feel compelled to repress things that are considered whatever the mainstream standard is, whether it's whiteness or not. We think that this is what the real problem with is the solution, and they totally miss it on site government when they just pretend, sure.
How do you remove beauty standards on your side of the house?
What we think is that we're eliminating authority figures from being actors in this situation. Eliminating what we're proposing essentially is that celebrities don't make statements about what they do and don't think is beautiful. We think that this is a better, but you're still by not endorsing, that's making a statement. And so when you do that, you're essentially inherently saying that that's bad because that still reaffirms the fact that they're an authority and that you should listen to what they think is beautiful and care about it. What we think is better is to essentially just promote the idea that beauty should be defined internally, not externally based on some arbitrary standard, but rather subjectively based on what you think is actually right or wrong. We think that this is essentially a better solution. So just to go over what my main points are, we think that essentially they don't really have a lot of solvency on their side of the house because the selection, they haven't actually changed the fact that white beauty standards still exist in these societies. The only thing they're changing is what the selection factors are, because there's going to be people with naturally lighter skin, and as long as these standards exist at all, the people with naturally lighter skin are just going to get selected for it. Meanwhile, the people who are committed to agreeing to not bleach their skin will continue to be discriminated against. We think that beauty standards are the real problem in this motion, and we think that they don't solve for the existence of beauty standards. In fact, they make it worse when they reaffirm that there are beauty standards at all and that there is an external authority who you should listen to about this. And so we think in this way they're detrimental to making progress towards what we think is the real solution, which is essentially encouraging individuals to define beauty for what it is, subjective, which means that they'll internally consider what they think is beautiful and express themselves in that way. We think that this is a better way for people to have higher quality lives, for people to not discriminate against each other for based on arbitrary reasons, because there aren't these arbitrary standards anymore. Thank you.
Outside the speaker for the speech,
Actors have a really unique role in society. in many cases, like Izzy's telling you, they act as role models. People get their cues from them. People growing up choose to want to look like them. That is how we think this model works. That's how we think people in these beauty products are so widespread. This is how we think they get a lot of the strength that they do in Indian society. We think that's part of the reason why we would prefer that these actors don't endorse them, so that the role models that are existing, the role models that people look up to, are actors who are born in their natural skin. We think that's where we actually get the benefits on our side of the house. And I have a lot of rebuttal before I bring you 2 points, specifically how we think this shapes elites in society, but also why we think this whitewashes Bollywood, and why we think Bollywood is inherently a cultural institution as well. A couple of points, right? So the LO gets up here, and she says that there's a problematic standard, right? There's a standard in which having even a beauty standard is bad. And like, while we agree, I think we also say that it's unrealistic that we're ever going to get rid of beauty standards, that those are ever going to disappear, and we don't really hear mention for this. We think that standards, at best, should be multiple, right? We think that standards for different societies and different communities and different cultures should be reflective of the majority of people, or just the people within those cultures who are otherwise, pushed to the margins. We think that is what's a better standard in this debate. We think that that's what we're defending. We're not defending a single beauty standard. We think that's a much better way in which society should operate, in which the type of beauty standard is multiple. You have a plurality of beauty standards. But secondly, she says that, how are we doing this? Are we banning them from using this? Are we banning them from endorsing? I don't think this is a policy motion. I think how we have to weigh this round is in a world in which these actors weren't using these, weren't endorsing these, that would look much better than in a world in which they were, right? Okay, and then I think we hear the meat of the argument, which is basically that there are already people who, those who are now going to be preferenced are those who already have lighter skin. A couple of responses to this. First, we think that you're more likely to get a mix when you don't have people using these products, right? I think in the status quo, even if you're a good actor, you still use this product because you want to get ahead. I think in the absence of endorsing, in the absence of using these products, those actors, those very good actors, are still going to get these jobs, but now they're actually pressured, they're coerced, see Izzy's arguments, to using these products. I think that's entirely problematic. But secondly, we think at best this is a wash, right? At best in either scenario, we're going to have light-skinned actors preferred, but at least on our side of the house, they're not using these products, they're not endorsing these products, and we think that the majority of society now isn't using these products. That means in other areas, in other fields, you're going to have other people with darker skin who can act as role models. We think that's still a benefit that we get on our side of the house. We think we're going to still have less people at the top because now they're not going to grow up to these role models. They're not going to grow up following these people. We think that part of the strength of actors over something like a politician is that they're more approachable, right? They're in your more favorite movies. We think that's why they're uniquely the best role models. They're the role models that people choose the most. We think that we're still going to have people at the top of with a plurality of skin tones, right? Okay. So going on to my own case, specifically my first point about what happens to elite in society. I'll take a point of information at this point if there is one. Okay, so what happens we think of elites in society, right? We think that whiteness is tied with these products with being an elite, right? This creams, that's the skin whitening process, is only going to be accessible to those with disposable income, right? We think that when they're endorsing these, when they are appearing in advertisements, not everyone's going to be able to afford those. There has to be some amount of disposable income, especially with things like surgeries or things like the actual medical procedures. The problem now is in places like India, you have the richest, the most mobile members being the whitest members of society in other fields as well. We think that's bad because we don't think that this is a personal choice for many people, or people have access to make this personal choice. Not only do the standards of beauty change, but we think in general there's also just a harmful perception within the society. We think that this is the way in which stereotypes are created. When you're only seeing the poorest as a shade darker, and you're seeing the richest, or those even just in the middle class, as being lighter, we think that's how these stereotypes are created. You now have assumptions about people's wealth. You now have assumptions about how wealthy people are. Before I go on, yeah.
Skin products really aren't that expensive. The real thing is that people who are more wealthy can essentially spend more time indoors, not outside working. And so they're still going to have lighter skin, and you're still going to have that problem you were talking about.
Right, but I think that, there is an amount of disposable income that you have to have in order to buy these products. Even if they're not expensive, there are people who only worry about putting food on the table, or there are people who live below the poverty line who still won't be able to access these. But still, even worse, what we're going to say is that the actual things like surgeries or medical procedures are more expensive or even less accessible, but those are the ones that actually make you whiter as a result. We think that that's how you actually get the change on your side of the problem with your side of the house. What you ignore is that there is a coercive effect, right? Because these are role models, this is a coercive effect. So even people who would already be successful regardless of their skin color, now they will use this product anyways because they want to be more successful, right? So even if what you say is true, at best it's a wash, but we still think that this coercion happens on our side of the house, and that's why it's uniquely bad. So why is it bad that you now have assumptions about people's wealth based on their skin tones? We think, first of all, what you're going to see is that they're going to have better access to things like jobs. People are going to make assumptions on their education. People are going to make assumptions about their upbringing. We think that's uniquely harmful. We think that also there's going to be perceptions about them being wealthy, them being more successful in terms of winning seats in government or things like that. We think that those who are using these products are now going to have access within the government. We think that that's part of the problem on their side of the house, when really the richest, or even just the middle class alone, are the ones who are going to have access to these products. We think that's where they create the disparity on their side of the house. My last point. We think that this whitewashes Bollywood, and I think that Izzy pointed this out really well, right? That Bollywood isn't just, why isn't this motion set in Hollywood? Why isn't this motion set for black people in Hollywood? Why can't they use it? It's because it's a cultural institution in a lot of ways, that a lot of the films feature prominent parts culture. So we think that right now, that this race appropriates culture, we think that now it's something that the whites can buy into, that people who are whites can buy into this, they can have some sort of claim over it. We think that the true Indians can't be only white Indians. We think that all Indians in general have to be represented within these films, have to be represented within this cultural institution. We think that's actually the benefit that we get on our side of the house, right? We think, like they said, they want to tell you, and what they're trying to tell you is that pale skin is still going to be preferred on their side of the house, which at best is a wash, but remember, we still think that people are coerced into this. That's why we think we're winning this round, and I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thought the speaker for the speech, and now recognize Deputy Leader Officer.
So first I'm going to go through and do a little bit of rebuttal out of what we just heard out of SciGov and why it's not exactly accurate. So first off, they talked a lot about the wealth disparity. Wealthy people can spend time indoors. There's still a way for wealthy people to have whiter skin than poor people, and honestly, in countries where Bollywood is popular, skin whitening products are not all that expensive. They are accessible to people of lower wealth brackets. Secondly, this still has impacts on class discrimination based on the skin tone, regardless of where it comes from, whether it's bleach or whether it's staying inside. He also talked about how shadism would go away. Shadism existed before bleaching products and would continue to exist without them. There are various skin tones that, within countries where Bollywood is popular, and just because, you think shadism would go away simply without the existence of whitening products isn't true. It's existed throughout time, and it's not going to magically disappear. He said that this takes away a singular beauty standard, but I think that we disagree on that very heavily, because this doesn't take away a singular beauty standard. What it does is it switches the singular beauty standard to be only women that are natural. Well, I'm going to get into that a little bit in my extension, which is going to be about how telling women that they're only beautiful if they're natural is inherently anti-feminist. He said that, it doesn't, by not using these skin whitening products, Bollywood actors will stop endorsing them and it won't matter. But we don't think, we don't think that matters, because you can't unlighten your skin. Actors in Bollywood right now who have really light skin, they can't stop wearing their skin just because you tell them to not endorse it. And we think that when you said that coercion happens on our side of the house, we think that coercion happens on your side of the house to the actors in Bollywood who already have light skin or who enjoy using skin whitening products because, that's their choice, and threatening their livelihood based on their choice isn't an acceptable thing to do. Not right now. So getting into my argument a little bit. We believe on this side of the house that telling women what they are and what they can be and what is beautiful in any case, or men, is inherently second wave anti-feminist, and in that sense kind of anti-feminist. it's not acceptable to tell people, and especially in this case women, that what they can and cannot be. It's telling people that the only way to exist is to be natural. Now, there isn't a belief that maybe natural is better, but you could say the same thing about makeup or about hair relaxing products, but I'll take back out.
Okay, do you think there's a problem then in this choice when it continues to perpetuate this idea and capitulation that whiteness is somehow better than what they're naturally born with?
I think that that is a problem. Of course we think that that's a problem. We think that there shouldn't be a beauty standard at all, though. And we think that telling women that they should be or shouldn't be anything, whether it's telling women that they should be or shouldn't be, like should be white or whiter than they're born, or shouldn't be whiter than they're born, it should keep their skin natural, is not okay, no. So going back into that, what the examples I gave were that people who want to wear makeup or relax their hair, those choices are just as valid as not doing those things. We should eliminate beauty standards so people can make decisions about their appearance free from like unfair power dynamics and free from like any sort of outside influence. We should stop telling women that they're only valid, that their existence is only valid if they're beautiful, and additionally in this sense, that their existence is only valid if they're natural, because that's just as messed up as telling women that their existence is only valid if their skin is white, right? No. We shouldn't tell women what to be at all. And getting back into some of my partner's points, we think that celebrities in this case are just really bad actors, actually. We think that celebrities are imperfect people with undue societal influence, and it doesn't matter if they don't endorse the products or not. You can still see the effects on their skin if they've already used them, which a large portion of people in Bollywood have. We think that it reaffirms the power that celebrities shouldn't have to decide what's beautiful. Why do celebrities have this in the first place? There's no reason that celebrities should be able to hand down, like, essentially verdicts on what and what doesn't make a person valuable. We believe that beauty shouldn't be objective. It should be determined by the individual, because when it comes from inside and when it comes from a sense of self-worth as opposed to external values, what that does is it creates a more true sense of being able to feel beautiful by your standards. And whether that is lightening your skin, or whether that is relaxing your hair, or whether that is using makeup, we feel that nobody should tell any other person anytime that what they do with their body is invalid, because that is inherently anti-feminist. No. Actually, no, I'll take it.
You haven't given us a reason why beauty standards disappear on your side of the house. It's much worse when we tell women that they have to use a product in order to be beautiful.
We think that okay, so what you're saying essentially is that telling women that they have to use a product to be beautiful is wrong. But we think that telling a woman that they have to do anything to be beautiful is wrong. We think that by telling actors that they're not that they have to endorse or not endorse anything, and in this case not endorse skin whitening products, is still sending a message to women. We think that by not having actors talk about what they do in terms of their beauty, that's a better way to go about getting rid of beauty standards. And I also wanted to talk a little bit from my last point about how coercion doesn't only happen on our side of the house. The Bollywood actors in this case, a lot of whom do use whitening products, skin whitening products, are coerced and they're societally shamed, if this becomes the standard, into not using products. And you know what? That's their choice, because they are autonomous individual actors. Bollywood actors and actresses should be able to use what they like, but not talk about it in the public sphere, of course, because we do believe that that's the best way to eliminate beauty standards. But it is coercive. And we don't think, actually, on this side of the house, that threatening somebody's livelihood is a good way to go about changing beauty standards. It's coercive, and it's not appropriate, it's cruel. Telling somebody that their worth depends on how they look, whether that's natural or whether that's white, is incredibly wrong. It's inherently anti-feminist, and that's why we are proud to oppose this motion.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and now recognize member of government.
actors and actresses should have outreaching harms or be responsible to be the arbiters of like what we consider culture and important. Like whether or not they should be, I'm sorry, but they are, and that's something we simply have to deal with. Just saying like, I don't know, they probably shouldn't be in charge of this, that doesn't negate the fact that they still have this power and that people still buy tabloids and still keep up with their lives and actually look to them for what they should be doing. But some main constructive, like from what we just heard. First off, I think there's a big misunderstanding of why people use whitewashing products and why they use skin lightening things. It's not because they're like, I think this will look really, really nice for me. It's because of this thing called like racism, especially like looking at the U.S. and like not specifically looking at like ethnicity based, but simply skin tone. And these people, there's extreme cultural like ramifications for, or like I don't know, you get some sort of benefit for being white passing or being, you know, considered what like most people would, I don't know, sorry, rambling. But so it's societal pressure that's making them do this. It's not like necessarily like they're choosing this free out of coercion like any sort of other body modification or something like that. But like why are there also constraints on their choice and why is this necessarily not anti-feminist? So we think people should have free choice to kind of do whatever they want so long as it doesn't harm people. So if I want to drink and I'm of drinking age, that's fine, but there's a reason I can't go in my car and drive after. So if capitulating to white standards is harmful for like and has a bad outward-reaching effect, we should probably constrain that. So yes, grow body hair, wear makeup, whatever, that's fine. But like when you're perpetuating harmful systems that like typically are interlaced with inequalities and things like that, we probably think this is something we should stop and like not allow it under this like kind of oversimplified version of like feminism and free choice. But moving on to my construction. So what exactly are the roles that movies serve? So they're more than just entertainment. They are representation. They reflect different aspects of the human experience. But what happens when you don't see yourself, or worse, you see someone who would be like you, but then chose to abandon those qualities in order to fit societal standards? But also, more so than that, they set cultural norms and ascribe value to the norms that they're setting. So in that way, they shape society. We look at movies to see what actions, aesthetics, etc. to value. And so, like, where have we even seen this? Or go ahead.
Do self-esteem and self-love solve for problems of like a material reality, like wealth disparity, lack of access to education, lack of income?
I'm going to go into that more later in my speech, and I will definitely flag it. But like certain things, if we capitulate to the idea that like, oh, even though your merit has not changed, but like somehow when you're like more white looking, that there's like that's better, and we continue to ascribe that in like a more extended degree that whiteness is better, we think that's probably not something bad. So no, it might not solve for an end of racism, but that doesn't mean that our like benefits are like negligible or that they don't exist. But not right now. So like, what's an example where we've seen movies have outward-reaching effects even when they're bad? Following the 50 Shades of Grey release, a man raped his girlfriend after trying to reenact a scene. Even though she screamed no, he said this was in the movie and continued to go, despite blatant attempts or blatant screams of non-consent. This is terrible. He took what he saw in the movie, even if it was grossly misrepresented, which is still debatable, it's incredibly problematic. But like we see people taking what they see in film, even at its worst and at its best, and applying that to their life. And we think that what these skin lightening products do is continue to perpetuate harmful things. But so like why exactly are like actors who are intrinsic like components or like people that work within this film industry, why are they different from you and me? And I think this is a clear distinction. Because they are arbiters of culture just by their role in this industry. And I'm sorry, opening government, that this seems to go against what you say, but they are simply arbiters of culture, not right now. But like also they have larger platforms. So we think when you have a greater outward-reaching effect, that you have a greater obligation to like actually use that responsibly. When your actions and words impact like a much larger realm of people, then you are responsible for that more so than the average person. So like I can go and like maybe scream some like racist crap, and that's really, really bad, but it's probably like even worse if like someone in a university who has outward-reaching respect and responsibilities to the people they're working with, it's worse when they say it. So we think that that's why we need to put this on actors, but you disagree.
Bleaching products are the results of a society with beauty standards, not the cause. Why do you think removing the symptom will solve the problem? All they're going to do is hire actors with naturally lighter skin, and you're going to have all the problems you were just talking about.
I think if you're imposing these standards and then saying like, yeah, we'll play a game, this looks great, like, oh, you have these like whitening products, and even though we're morally against this or this is wrong, but we're going to engage with it anyway, that's probably bad. Like, silent complacence or actually active involvement in systems that are harmful is probably not a good thing that you want. But like, so more importantly, what happens when, So actors, their race transcends more than the role because that is something they carry with them out of the set. And so what's important? When you capitulate that whiteness is more than like simply beauty, or that it's more than like something that's like maybe more aesthetically pleasing and like these like really harmful social constructs, you capitulate to some degree that whiteness is like superior as a whole. And why? Your merit as an actor or actress has not changed. It hasn't. You are the same actor you were when your skin was darker. But what happens now? You're saying that somehow, even though you were the same person, now that you are lighter, you are better and more valuable. And we think it's a really harmful thing to be doing. But like, why are we specifically looking at India, and why not Hollywood? We'd like to expand that it's more than just eradicating culture. You're entrenching more harmful things than just this idea of racial superiority. And that's like these ideas of colonialism and the associations of power hierarchies that they have. As British colonies formerly had colonized India, what happened is you got this insane divide between the North and the South, with the North having like traditionally much lighter skin and getting a lot of benefits associated with that. They had more economic power and weight, and we still see these inequalities here. And what we're doing by perpetuating that this certain group of people is better than the Southern ones, you're continuing to like not only eradicate culture and like make them more westernized standards, but also just make them more in colonized standards, like which is really, really harmful and not something I don't think anyone should be like arguing for. But what happens, or what does the world look like where the status quo is continued? What does like opposition necessarily have to do? They have to tell you why somehow whitening your skin is okay, or why this is beneficial. And they have to tell you like why this capitulation is something that could maybe help people, because on our side of the bench, we don't think it is. On our side of the bench, we think this only furthers divides and actually makes really negative cultural norms and like that we shouldn't be ascribing value to. And so for all these reasons, we are so proud to propose.
I've had the speaker for this speech, and now invite you to the session.
Thank you for calling me up. I'm going to condense the Gov bench into a few simple statements, talk about how those statements, especially in the specific context of India, where like caste perhaps might be a more significant part of a person's material reality than like the whether or not they use skin lightening creams, and then move on to the general theme of our case, which is that we need to engage the ugliness of society head on in order to make substantive long-term change. I'm going to talk about later in my speech about how like small mitigatory steps that focus on like minor issues are actually incredibly harmful. So what do we get from the top half of the debate? Top half, they have first sort of like, if there were no more advertising, no more implicit or explicit endorsement by celebs, we'd see browner people in movies, on TV, and in Bollywood in general. I think opening addressed this pretty much. We don't think that this is necessarily the case. Insofar as OG is talking about like an authentic Indian skin tone, we say this is pretty absurd, right? Like we say that there are all kinds of skin tones that exist within the entire subcontinent, and there's like plenty of variety, no thank you, and that like insofar as colorism was not started by skin lightening creams, and racism and imperialism and colonialism predate skin lightening creams, and if all skin whitening mechanisms were to vanish from the earth today, racism and imperialism would continue. So like we don't think this is necessarily the case. And then they say this leads to more self-esteem and identification for darker skinned people. People of the panel, self-love is only one part of the battle, right? Like being able to identify with characters on the screen is like, sure, it's a meaningful thing for individuals, and sometimes it is very painful to not see people in the media who look like you. But in focusing on self-love, we turn the emphasis in systems of oppression onto the individual. We say that like the solvency for racism, the solvency for colorism is how individuals feel about themselves. on our side of the house, we say that this is fundamentally a dangerous view because it posits like the individual against society instead of focusing on like the broader network of like material realities such as job discrimination, like if we're talking about gender, like the very real realities that like women all over the world face in terms of danger of their physical safety, like lack of access to clean food and water. Like we say that all of these problems are like worse solved when people focus the attention of like so the solvency for like broader systems of discrimination on individuals, how they feel about themselves, back half.
Okay, so what happens then, aside from individuals critiquing the entire movie industry? Like, why then is that a battle not worth fighting? Like, we can still try to solve for both without.
So I'm going to talk
exploding
about
this.
that in my first independent point as soon as I address your half of the bench. So we get the same sort of analysis from the back half. They say that if Indians were browner, we would get the marginal benefit of people loving themselves more. Again, so I want to talk to you about like large problems that actually affect sort of like numbers of Indian people. And we say that like some of the larger problems that exist, and this is not a comparative like, oh, they should be focusing on this just because it's bigger. Like I'm going to go into on my independent points the way that like focusing on small issues and like the individual as the crux of oppression is like really, really harmful. But like we say that we get a better analysis or a better sort of solvency for like long-term systems of oppression when we face things head-on instead of stifling colorism from the conversation. Because when you remove advertising, when you remove sort of celebrities who are like talking about skin lightening, you remove it from the conversation. It becomes a secret. It becomes this like really shameful. It just is removed from public discourse. Now, why is this really, really bad? We say it is our first independent point is that non-endorsement removes the explicit acknowledgement from the public eye, shifting discourse and making racism more insidious. So we say it's easier for people to fight against oppression when they can point at something and they can say this is the physical embodiment of what I'm talking about. And yeah, skin lightening is problematic. So we say on our side of the house, have the problematic advertisements so young Indian activists can point at skin lightening advertisements and they say this is exactly what we're talking about. This is like the material, like materialization of the larger systems of like classism and like racism that we are talking about. We compare this to the circulation of videos of like Black Americans being shot by the police. These are very, very painful things for people to watch. They're like especially degrading for Black viewers to see like that. I'm about to explain what this has to do with anything. It's very, very painful to see. But we say that long term, the circulation of these painful videos actually leads to a greater galvanization. So people who don't know a lot about specific issues, like the people in this room, like none of us have mentioned caste so far in a debate about India. I think this is like pretty evident of the fact that our knowledge is surface level at best, and we are able to point to this specific thing and say this is the realization of oppression. And we say that insofar as like large, moderate groups who might not already be galvanized against oppression are really important in like fights against racism, in fights for like fairer housing, in fights for less discrimination. We say that galvanizing the moderate is a really, really important thing. It is painful to see yourself not represented, but we say that having that acknowledged and engaging with the ugliness and the messiness of racism is the only way that we are going to address it, because mitigatory steps make it more insidious, harder to address, and harder for large, moderate populations who like have a fair amount of sway, right? Like maybe the majority of people don't feel one way or the other about like some of the material realities of like skin lightening, but we say if they're able to like if activists are able to point at skin lightening and galvanize those people, they get a better. But you disagree.
So our burden in this debate is not about solving imperialism. It's about like believing that like you shouldn't choose another skin color because you believed your other one was inferior. I think that's the burden you have to defend. You have to defend on choosing
So I'm going to
whiteness
talk
over
a little
your
bit about
inferior
respectability
race.
politics and why they're so problematic, right? So respectability politics, once again, identify the locus for oppression like on the individual. It's like it's your sort of individual choice. And we say that like limitation of the agency of already oppressed people makes for really, really bad politics, right? If you are a young, dark-skinned, aspiring Bollywood actress, putting the onus for like liberating like all brown-skinned women and like making them love themselves on you as an individual, limiting your ability to perhaps get jobs is like a really dangerous and shitty thing. Like respectability politics shame those who make reasonable decisions to better their material realities. And any sort of politic that says, okay, you oppressed person, okay, you darker-skinned person, like you are no longer able to use skin lightening to like better your material reality because like your body needs to be dedicated to the struggle is like fundamentally problematic and really, really dangerous. We don't want to shame people for the choices that they make based on like the material realities and the material privileges that come from being lighter skinned. Like, yeah, we say it's like really bad that like people feel pressure to do these things, but we say say that a politic that locates the onus for oppression on individual people says that their choice and their love and whatever they feel about themselves is like will solve racism is really, really dangerous because it ignores its systematic nature. We say on our side of the house, we have a better engagement with the messiness of all of these problems. Racism will not go away if we just stop talking about it. If anything, more conversation, more dialogue leads to the end of these atrocious ideals. Thank you.
I'm going to speak for the speech and now invite the government to wait.
We'll get there eventually. Thank you, Madam Speaker. All right. So before we get into how I want you guys to weigh this discussion, I think I need to go over some of the fundamental premises that we've heard coming out of opposition, because I think I need to refute some of those points so that you can properly weigh what we've actually talked about. The first thing I want to talk about is just something we heard in the last speech. We are putting the onus on aspiring Bollywood actors to come up through this system and change the standard. We're saying people who are already successful in this system need to take hold of this mantle and this charge and say, we as successful actors no longer place value on changing the color of our skin. So that's kind of that. And then another thing that I really, really wanted to address also is this whole idea coming out of opening up of choice feminism. So choice feminism is extremely problematic, and this is why. When you make if you make a choice in the absence of any societal standards, you're like, this is just how I want to be today. More power to you. But when you whiten your skin because it gets you a better job, because it gets you more social clout, because it makes your life easier, because it makes you more attractive, then you didn't make that choice in a vacuum. You made that choice because it was necessary for you to survive in the society that you live in. And we're saying this is how we're going to change the society that we live in. This is how we're going to, this is how we're going to make that society better. So this isn't the only thing wrong with Indian society. I mean, the color of people's skin isn't the only thing wrong with any society. And I absolutely think that changing the way people look at themselves and their self-love, which is something we've heard a lot out of, is not the only issue that we have to address. Absolutely. But we can't somehow remove self-love from public discussion. I mean, one of the most important things about empowering yourself is recognizing yourself. And one of the most important ways that you can see yourself, you know, if you want to be a really famous actor, let's say you really identify with a character in a movie, let's say that you really want to be an amazing dancer, right? And you like see an amazing dancer in a movie and you're like, well, I want to really be her, but you know, there might just be this nagging thing at the back of your mind that you place weight on because in your culture you've been told that lighter skin is more important. So you're like, yeah, but I'm too dark for that. I can't be that person. I can't be that dancer because that's not who I am. Obviously, if you're poor, if you're in the bottom of the caste system, which although is slowly changing in India, is absolutely still a present threat, right? Like, if you're at the bottom of the caste system, if you're part of this system, right? Like, there are a million barriers, right? But just because this is not the only barrier doesn't mean we should have removed it, right? We have to remove the barriers one by one. We have to take down the system bit by bit. And that's why we're saying we've got to take down this part of the system right now in order to remove barriers, right? So like that's one less thing they have to go to. So they still have to fight the caste system. They still have to fight the oppression of poverty. They still have to fight the oppression of gender, especially in a place that, you know, like India where they're having a lot of issues with that right now, even though they have this interesting dichotomous relationship between women and government, which is a long-standing tradition in India, but yet there's still this huge problem, right? So there are 101 barriers, and we're trying to make it 100. We're trying to get rid of this, right? So now I sort of want to get into positive material and why, based on those things, you should really weigh the arguments opposing up, but you disagree.
So if I, as a woman of color, apply for a job and get rejected because of my racial and gender identity, is it because I didn't love myself enough?
Absolutely not. There are 101 other factors, but I think an important part of you going for that job and applying for that job is believing that you can be a part of a structure which doesn't even want you yet. I mean, you have to be empowered to take that stance, and a large part of that has to do with self-empowerment. A large part of self-empowerment is loving yourself, and a large part of loving yourself is seeing yourself represented in media. And one of the things we want to talk about is actors as arbiters of culture, right? So what is the function of movies? The function of movies is to entertain, but the function of movies also is to set societal standards and legitimize certain ways of being and to create culture. And so we think that actors should represent a slice of the culture in India, which is an astoundingly diverse country, economically, racially, in terms of skin color. I mean, there are people in India who have never seen snow. There are people in India who live in snow 100% of the time. I mean, there's obviously going to be a difference in skin. And it's interesting that we talk about, you know, people, you hear opening up talking about people being inside versus outside being the only thing that affects skin tone. I mean, that's not it at all. There's just people started a different skin tone, and then people change their skin tone, and then people get tan or not tan. So it's a crazy thing, right? So, like, what would a world without actors, these arbiters of culture changing, look like? I mean, you have a subtle but insidious reinforcement of the multi-billion-dollar industry of self-hatred, right? You know, where these celebs have these re-entrenched, you know, not only colonialist but traditional Indian values that you know, place more value on people who are inside versus outside, place more people who, the British people felt more comfortable with white people, people who are whiter versus people who are not, right? Like, people do not all start at the same skin tone, and then people have to alter their skin tone to re-entrench this value that lighter people are better. So how does our side change that? How do these celebs as arbiters of culture? Well, there's a problem with the status quo, right? And actors as arbiters of culture can become a catalyst for change. They can start these discussions. The refusal to reaffirm that lighter standards of beauty are better by the refusal to continually participate in this action of lightening their skin, not now, allows people to start a conversation about how these actors are refusing these cultures. And one of the things we heard talking about was like out of sight out was like, oh well, the fact that we have this surface understanding, right? And the fact that these awful ads exist will start a conversation. Well, actually, it's really interesting because recently an Indian ad for a major jewelry company, it was an ad about a wedding, and this ad featured a mother who was dark. She had a really dark skin tone, and everyone was talking about it. They're like, oh my God, look how dark this woman is. The jewelry company had particularly chosen not to play into these standards of beauty, and instead of everyone just passing by this entrenched cultural institution of like lighter people being more beautiful and just being like, oh crap, another light. They were like, oh my God, look, this conversation we can have because these people are refusing to buy into this standard. It does start conversation. And so celebrities refusing to buy into this can start conversations about, not now, about the standard of beauty, right? So like, we harness the power of celebrities to model a new type of beauty, a new type of self-love, acceptance and appreciation of the way that a person is, right? We allow people with a privilege to alter the way that they interact with this culture, this entrenched cultural institution. People who already have social clout, actors, people who already have wealth, these rich people, right? People who are not fighting other barriers I'll take you after this. Fighting other barriers, actually go this last year.
It's pretty absurd that you're saying privileged people who don't have to bleach their skin in order to be successful should say accept yourself. Meanwhile, poor people still experience discrimination when they haven't changed the standard.
You can't ask poor people to be you can't place all the responsibility and all the onus of changing the standard on people who don't have any power. You have to place the onus on this on people who have the ability and the opportunity to start these discussions. If I'm Aishwarya Rai, I can do what I want because I'm Aishwarya Rai. So if I'm not going to light my skin anymore. I'm already a Bollywood star. I'm already internationally famous, right? Like, I can be like, I'm not using skin lightening tones, and that's not going to affect, that's not going to seriously affect my income. That's not going to seriously affect whether or not I can be a movie star anymore. Like, people are still going to want me. Actors, as the arbiters of cultures, and as people whose privilege insulates them, are the people who are able to start these conversations. And we want to harness that power, and we want to use those people's privilege, and we want to use those people who are already a part of these institutions to alter these institutions as part of one step on a long journey of creating a better social standard and a better societal standard surrounding the culture of skin color in India. Thank you. For all those reasons, we're
I've had the speaker for their speech, and I invite the last speaker.
So I'm going to boil the debate down into two questions today. The first is how will this affect deeply entrenched standards of beauty as they intersect with race and class? And the second is what kind of message do we send to oppressed groups when we send members of their community responsible for their own oppression? So now to the first question. How will this idea affect these deeply entrenched standards of beauty as they intersect with race and class? Now, Assad government has talked to you a lot about whitewashing. They've talked to you a lot about the role of actors as public figures and how these public figures influence society as a larger scale, but particularly if they've talked about youth and how youth are vulnerable. We on side opposition have explained to you how these this issue of whitewashing exists, but it's much more complicated and much more nuanced than side government.